Regards, and welcome to Ryan Rambles You To Rest, the podcast where I talk at length about matters of nearly no urgent need, nor heavy impact on our daily lives, in the interest of helping you there, off to a more peaceful state. Well, it sure has been a minute since our last opportunity to ramble away some restful time together. Since our previous palaver, the winter term holidays have transpired. I hope that each of you has had as much rest as you required to recharge your batteries. For my own end of things, the fall was a very busy time, hence the infrequency of our meetings here, and I can surely say that my own batteries needed to be recharged. My holiday time this year around Christmas was a bit more stressful than usual, in that we had to travel a ways, and I tend to find winter holiday travel to be excessively stressful. So many folks traveling all at once. For many, the only time they will spend in airports all year, along with rough weather, delayed and canceled flights. All of that I can do without. That's why I like being the home team. And due in part to being away at Christmas, we got to home team it at Thanksgiving, which we had not done in some time. Thanksgiving, of course, being both family and food-centric, has to be up there on the holiday list for me. Around Thanksgiving time last year, we shared our thoughts with one another about the best holiday foods in a bonus episode of Ryan Rambles You To Rest, a sleep podcast, entitled The Best Holiday Foods. Well, for now, the winter holidays are behind us, unless, of course, you count the superb owl, and the new year has begun. This also means that, however sporadically or frequently we've been able to visit, it has now been 2 years of Ryan Rambles You To Rest, a sleep podcast. Thank you each and every one for tuning in and finding your way off to rest, and especially to those resters who have left comments on YouTube. In this episode, I will engage in another Amiable Amble, a more compact modality which we tried out in our last episode together. That could take us to any place or direction on a whim. Before we begin, I would like to recommend that you subscribe to this show on your podcast platform of choice or YouTube. For news and announcements, follow us on Instagram at Ryan Rambles Pod. Our soundtrack is by Disparition. And so we are now here at the departure point of our smooth sojourn. Beyond this simple segue lies the unknown. We are reminded of the famous tale of adventure, wherein one adventurer to the other inquired, "Where do these stairs go?" And in reply, said the other, "They go up." In an amiable amble, I begin with a thought, idea, or moment that comes to mind when I begin the segment, and then I let that take us wherever it may. In this sense, an amiable amble could be the purest form of Ryan Rambles You To Rest, a sleep podcast. It may resemble at moments any of our other regular rambling segments, or perhaps otherwise extend our journeys into new territory. For now, I thought it would be fine to begin with the new year itself. I'm not, generally speaking, the sort of person who gets too involved with thinking very hard about New Year's resolutions. And I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with it. But I haven't been too interested in it lately, for a number of years. But that doesn't mean that the new year doesn't bring excitement for a new time period, for the next year. I used to, when I did occasionally make the odd New Year's resolution, would wait until a few weeks into the new year, because I'm a Capricorn and my birthday is in this zone. So I would always like to give myself a little bit of grace, so to speak, on having to launch whatever the new program is. And I think having a new program is fine. We've chosen this time of year to start things over or try new things. I've sometimes pondered, and not for too long, mind you, how somewhat arbitrary the new year seems to be. And we've chosen a time of year that is right up there with these other winter holidays. You really barely get a break between Christmas and New Year's. Now, sometimes that's a good thing, because if you have the type of job that gives you holiday time off, you may be fortunate enough that that job gives you a week or two at the holiday. And having that extra time off to recharge your batteries is definitely something to appreciate. But if you have a lot going on, if you have a big family and need to travel at Christmas, sometimes the proximity of New Year's and Christmas can be a little rough. Although this year I did travel for Christmas, and we were the home team, so to speak, for New Year's, and had several friends over. Now, we're getting older, so it's not too raucous of a time. And although the traveling for Christmas was a little stressful. I will say that the days leading up to New Year's and a couple of days after, I had kind of an epic amount of relaxation plugged in there. And I definitely needed some rest. I've been very busy. On the other hand, there is also the side of having those two events so close together that gives you that week off, if you're lucky, in the middle, and kind of makes that period of time all the more reason to see family and friends. And if you don't need to fly specifically, then that period can be a little bit magical. Now, besides the convenience there, I do feel like it is a bit arbitrary. One wonders why we chose the dead of winter to restart the year. What about restarting the year in the springtime, when nicer weather is returning and plants are beginning to bloom again? Wouldn't it make more sense to have New Year's at that time? Instead, in the United States, on April 15th, we have Tax Day. So instead of celebrating a new year, you have to pay the man. And it's not to say that there aren't enough holidays throughout the late winter and early spring. They pop up here and there. We don't need another one. I just wonder how appropriate it is that the new year happens in the dead of winter. And presumably a lot of other things are tied up in this yearly cycle we've created. Which is to say that it's not just one day or night that we celebrate the end of one year and the beginning of a new one, but all sorts of things are planned around this year cycle. We talk about all of the things that happen in a year, and we use that year period of time as a demarcation line to talk about especially entertainment, movies and TV shows that came out during a certain year, sports events use the year cycle, and as a result of that year cycle, a lot of things happen in the dead of winter. You know, I watch a certain amount of American football, and American football at the end of its season, when players have really been put through the ringer quite a bit, some of those games have to take place in the snow. And then, if the general busyness of the holidays isn't enough, all of the big Oscar movies release in December. Well, not all of them. And definitely not the front runners this year, but often studios wait to put those movies out at the end of September. And even often, some of those are released only in New York and Los Angeles at the end of December. The rest of us might have to wait until sometime in January. I suppose it could sound a little bit like I'm complaining here, but I'm not. It's always just been this way. I just think it's interesting to think about why. It's really hard to answer the question of why. From a conceptual standpoint, we may perhaps be able to dig into this via our friends at Wikipedia and learn more about the annual cycle. And I know that annual cycles go back a very long time. But part of where I'm coming from, though, is that traditions can be made to be broken. Maybe it's time to move the new year to springtime. We change other things. Today we take the internet for granted. The means by which you are hearing my voice right now is a level of technology and information communication that we had only dreamed of 25 years ago. In any case, I hope that you all have had a good start to your year. I do think that even if you don't have resolutions lined up, and resolutions can bring a certain amount of stress, and I would say to think in a different direction, it's good to take a little time to relax and reflect and make a concerted effort, given that we start this new year at this new time, to try to start it off well. It doesn't need to be with a bang, but it's good to make a point of having good interactions and a few good moments to start things off that can make you happy. For example, on New Year's Day, some of my friends and I got together, and we hadn't all necessarily had the best sleep or the best morning when we woke up. But we decided that it was a good idea for us to see each other again only a few hours later after we had celebrated New Year's. And we went to the neighborhood area near my home, and we got some sandwiches for lunch and some refreshing beverages, and hung out at a picnic table for a little bit, enjoying those things, sort of coming back to life, if you will. We got banh mi sandwiches. Those are very good sandwiches. If you haven't had a banh mi sandwich, I think they're becoming more and more popular all over the country. And I think that if you have at the very least, a city nearby, you might be able to get one somewhere in the city. And if you don't, look around anyway, because they're getting around. I think the first time I had a banh mi sandwich was maybe 20 years ago at this point. And it was sort of a revelation. I had never had anything like it before. Of course, it's a sandwich and it's on a French roll. But the flavor combinations are pretty unique. Your pickled daikon and carrots, and usually like a jalapeno, mayonnaise, and then whatever your preferred protein is. And there's the traditional has a pate and presumably from the French influence on Vietnamese food, as with the baguette that it's served on. And then perhaps I think ham, a form of ham might be what's normal as the classic banh mi sandwich. I, on the other hand, lean towards grilled pork if I'm having a more traditional one. And then I've had a few that feel a little bit more modern and a little bit more tailored to my Western palate, and have had some pretty good fried chicken, banh mi, and fried fish. Well, that was a good way to start the year. And after we had those sandwiches, we went for a walk in the park. And the weather was lovely. We got to see some dogs in the dog park. And we got to see the bison in the park. And the bison that day were in a different place than they normally are. The paddock for the bison is pretty big, and they usually hang out in their own kind of specific area. And it's like kind of close to their shelter usually, and they're usually not all together. And in fact, it's a little known fact that sometimes if you want to see the bison, the trick isn't to go along the main road where everybody else goes, but to go behind the bison paddock, which is where the dog park is. And on that side, they have another back area where usually their food is left. So sometimes they're just over there grubbing and not hanging out in the big open field that's on the main drag. But on this day, they were out in the big area and hanging out actually about as far away as you could get from the food. Very unusual. And after that, we walked around a bit more, up to the pond that has the boats on it. And there was a hot dog stand. And so we got hot dogs. It's difficult to say no to a hot dog. I find it particularly challenging. Hot dogs are wonderful. And now I can't recall at this moment, and maybe you, dear rester, can help me to remember, if we've talked about how hot dogs have their own stomach in the human body. And the way that works is that if your main stomach is already full, then hot dogs go to the hot dog stomach, where there's extra room for hot dogs, which is why it is possible to have a meal and go for a walk and find a hot dog vendor and order a hot dog and eat that hot dog. So from there we walked around a little further and found our way out to the polo field. and mostly just had a lovely afternoon walking through the park. And if you have a nice park to walk through, it's a good way to kick things off. You get some fresh air. You see lots of other people that are out for their first day of the year and have a good time, a relaxing time, as long as the weather is nice. And we were lucky to have good weather. Now, as I alluded to earlier when talking about the design of the year and how it impacts other things, it does also make this time very exciting. As somebody who enjoys American football, it is exciting that right now, at the time of this recording, we are not too far away from the big, superb owl. Now, as I've said, we've played the home team a bit since we moved because we have more space, and therefore have hosted a Thanksgiving and a Christmas, and I think 2 New Years at this point. But what we've always done, even before we had the space, was get people together for the superb owl. And I like to think of it as a holiday. The other one we celebrate is the Oscars, and we'll talk about that in a minute, even though the ceremony itself is later. To me, though, what's great about the superb owl has always been getting together with people and having good food. I didn't even used to like football when I was younger, but we still celebrated the superb owl. We have a traditional food of the Super Bowl, of course, which is the taco salad. It is a concoction of distinctly American variety with iceberg lettuce and Doritos being among the featured ingredients, along with copious amounts of cheese, some beans, peppers, ground beef or ground impossible, as the case may be. We do it vegetarian. And I believe Catalina dressing. It's actually like a very common recipe I learned when I got older. Once there was internet, I think if you actually type in taco salad to Google, you will get almost the exact recipe. And there's kind of a reason for it, maybe not the least of which is that the idea was to make Kraft a great deal of money on selling cheese and salad dressing every year with a quote-unquote salad that would probably go over well in just about any American household. And with good reason, by the way. We don't make it every year just for tradition. We make it every year because everybody loves to eat it. It is definitely junk food. Perhaps you, among the dear resters, would endeavor to make a healthy version, but I think a lot of us appreciate the kind of naughtiness of the salad itself. And so it is therefore, and heretofore will be, an essential part of the superb owl experience. Now, speaking again of sandwiches, And this has been more of my endeavor over the last few years, is that I have also been trying to dial in a good Italian hoagie. And unfortunately, where I live, it's not easy to get the sort of soft hoagie rolls that we used to have when I was younger on the East Coast. And my endeavors have been somewhat hampered by the bread that I have gotten each year. And this isn't to say that the bread isn't itself good. And another thing that I like to do, if I can, is make it obscenely huge. So I've gotten often a large, 3-foot long French roll and made a giant sandwich out of it and cut it up. But last year my French roll, I think, was a day old, and a fresh French roll from a solid bakery isn't going to be great pretty quickly. And you really actually do probably want one of those soft, chewy Amoroso rolls. Now, for this year, I'm actually kind of excited because I have done a bit of exploring in the bread direction. And it turns out that one of the local chain grocery stores that I don't normally frequent sometimes carries Amoroso rolls. Now, previously, I thought the only way to get them was to order them on Amazon and in bulk. And to get the most desirable 12-inch Amoroso roll does require making an order online at a commercial level to the tune of something like 60 of them. And as much as I love a good Italian hoagie, and would even be happy to send friends home with an Italian hoagie after the superb owl, I don't think I could do 60. Now, I have discovered that they do freeze relatively decently, so it's not that crazy, but I think I'd have to go splits with some other folks to make it make sense. Anyway, so it turned out that this local chain store had them, and they have the non-commercial, non-restaurant version. In fact, they have 2 versions. One, which is the next size down. It's probably like an 8 or 10 inch. I think it's an 8. And that's a good enough size to have a satisfying homemade hoagie, which is what I've learned, and why I'm excited for the superb owl. They also sell a smaller, even smaller, quote-unquote club variety of the Italian roll, and that's even smaller. Now, I have found that these particular smaller rolls are actually pretty good for just a simple weekday sandwich. They were delivered, and delivered by accident. You see, what happened is that it was a rainy day, and I fell to thinking about the subject of the superb owl and the having of guests and the making of Italian hoagies. And I thought that it had just been some time since I had checked to see if the soft Philadelphia-based roll was not available somewhere nearby. And so when I discovered that it was nearby, I used an internet app to have some brought over. And because I don't like to make it seem like an obscene extravagance, I also ordered some additional foods to go with it, along with frozen foods that can be prepared in an air fryer, as we've just acquired the one. You can see sort of where this is going on some levels, that we're gearing up for a very healthy, superb owl. In any case, it was a rainy day, and this reasonable quantity of groceries was delivered. And upon putting away and cataloging all of the things from the delivery, it became apparent that the type of Amoroso roll delivered was in fact the club variety, the smaller one. And I will say that at that moment I was crestfallen, given that it was the entire reason for the order in the first place. However, you can't back down from a sandwich. And I prepared the hoagie as a small one and found that the size is actually less important than the type of bread. And so then, and therefore, enjoyed a homemade Italian hoagie with a small club-sized roll. For the final event, I intend to be prepared with the larger type. And I should add that I don't put it on the delivery person. I put it on Amoroso for making their bags of bread look identical. Now, this small club sandwich, not the club genre sandwich or format that you're familiar with, but the club roll sandwich that I had, I did not have some of the other crucial ingredients, specifically the cold cuts. And what you believe should be on an Italian hoagie is largely to do with your personal preferences of what would go on an Italian hoagie. Of course, there are several things that would never go on an Italian hoagie. Perhaps, for example, pepper jack cheese. That seems out. But I'll bet you that somebody has made a quote-unquote Italian hoagie with pepper jack cheese. I wouldn't order it as such. But something that I do tend to respect about regional foods is that while there's always a kind of traditional and signature version, when you go to the places that those foods come from, you encounter all of the variants because, culturally speaking, people are going to eat that food disproportionately more often than they will in any other part of the world. And as such, the food soul desires variety from time to time. And for that reason, you probably can find a number of Italian hoagies with unusual ingredients, if not pepper jack cheese. I'll bet there are some Philadelphia sandwich shops that have a whole list of hoagies that have odd choices. But for me, it is about trying to dial in the perfect, relatively traditional Italian hoagie. And that can begin with the cold cuts, besides the bread, which we've already discussed. If I'm being fair, I think the bread might be the most crucial ingredient. But the complete trip to rapture lies in the rest of the ingredients and back to the cold cuts. Now, last year I found for me what I think was the perfect combination of deli meats for the Italian hoagie. I'm somebody who tends to think that the Italian hoagie ought to have, at minimum, 3 meats. And as a person who makes vegetarian versions of almost all of the food I love, I will add that I feel the same way about the vegetarian version. Part of what works about a perfectly constructed Italian hoagie is the multitude of deli meat flavors or textures. For that reason, it is important to find multiple kinds, whether you're doing plant-based or animal-based proteins. Now, for my end of things, it's about the animal proteins on the Italian hoagie. And my primary preference goes with this. You begin with mortadella, basically adult bologna, then a spicy salami, thin sliced spicy salami, and then a mild coppa. And what you get from all of these are different textures, different amounts of fattiness, different amounts of saltiness, and different amounts of spiciness. And those 3 work together in concert. Now, I should add that on the cold cut side of things, I am also a traditionalist insofar as I do think that provolone is the base cheese for an Italian hoagie. But to amble back one moment for our plant-based resters out there, I like to look for usually at least 2 varieties of tofurkey. I like to go with the one that is clearly bologna themed, to mimic the mortadella part of the sandwich. If I can find that one, I go for that one. If that one is not available, there's a ham one, and that one is an okay substitute. Then I veer a little bit in terms of one-to-one comparisons for the coppa element, because there really isn't like a thin, fatty, plant-based alternative at the moment. So I kind of like to lean towards having 2 that kind of lift in the direction of the salami. So there's a pepper turkey themed faux meat, And then to get a little bit of that spicy salami experience in support, I like to use the plant-based pepperoni slices that you can get for pizza. And that trio tends to work pretty well. And still, in that case, not making a vegan sandwich, the cheese would be provolone still. And then from there, the truth of the Italian hoagie is that it's simply not rocket science. You just need to have some of the right ingredients. And even if your proportions aren't great for some of the other things, you're still left with a very good sandwich. So, from where we've set our stage, you just need to add shredded lettuce, thinly sliced white onion. I usually like to use a mandolin. And you can also use that mandolin for your tomatoes. And tomatoes are kind of the final touch. Besides, oil and vinegar. I think it's just crucial to have oil and vinegar. I would recommend your personal preference, of course, just like with everything else. And then, finally, you do need salt and pepper, and you do 100% need oregano. And if you don't have oregano on that sandwich, you're not getting all the way there. Oregano is without a doubt one of the easiest to forget about or not notice or dismiss elements. And as a fan of this sandwich, and I am frustrated that my San Francisco-based Philly cheesesteak chain that used to carry it doesn't carry it anymore, because I haven't been able to find a, to my sense, perfect Italian hoagie, is that you see a lot of places that will sub out some combination of oil, vinegar, and oregano for something else, like a pesto or a tapenade or some kind of house spread. And I get that can maybe be the easy way of doing things from time to time. Maybe it's easier to do a spread than it is to do something, getting the proportions right with oil and vinegar and salt and pepper and oregano. But that's where I go with those things. I'd rather have them, and a lot of places don't do it. An Italian hoagie does not have mozzarella, in my opinion. Not trying to mozzarella shame anybody, but it's the wrong cheese, if you ask me. But, like I said, to each their own Italian hoagie. Do you like Italian hoagies, dear rester? Do you have a favorite sandwich, or a favorite sandwich for an event? Either to watch a sports ball game, or a movie, or just going to the park and having a sandwich there, or even a favorite go-to for work. Let me know. And we'll leave it here for this amiable episode. I want to thank you all, dear resters, for your patience through this most recent hiatus from our visits together. I hope as well that you have been adequately rambled to rest and are not hearing what I am saying right now. However, if for some reason you are conscious at this time, I will leave you with these parting words. Wish. Jar. Past. Visitor. Neck. Haunt. Quizzical. Pigs. Resolute. And suppose. Thank you again. I am your host, Ryan. Music has been by Disparition. And until we meet again, may your days be stress-free and your nights be restful.